today with Ken David of Niles, Ohio. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Ken, can you start us off with some background on yourself? Where and when were you born, for instance?
I was born in January of 1950 in a small town of Girard, currently living in Niles, which is a matter of 4 or 5 miles away.
Okay. Well, did you grow up there in Girard? Or?
Yeah, I grew up in Girard.
And what did your family do for a living then?
Mom was a housewife. She was a stay-at-home mom, and Dad worked. And
What kind of job did he have?
he was a machinist all his life.
Okay, so was he working in sort of a factory or repair shop? Or?
Yeah, factories, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And how many kids were in the family?
I have a brother and 2 sisters.
All right. And then did you go to public schools there?
Yes.
Okay.
Public school, public high school.
All right. And when did you graduate from high school?
Graduated in '68 and got drafted in '69.
Okay. And what did you do in between graduation and when you got drafted?
I was recruited by the State of Ohio Highway Department. I worked in centrifuge on blacktop plants, testing blacktop.
Okay. How did you wind up with that?
They came to the school and they went through the certain records and they picked like 7 of us and they hired 2 of us.
Okay. Now, at your school, did most kids at that point not go to college, or
Most of them went to college.
they did go to college?
The ones that did not go to college got drafted.
All right. Now, at the time you got drafted, how much did you know about the war in Vietnam or what was going on over there?
Nothing. We never talked about it in school.
You didn't see stuff on TV, or?
Didn't even know where it was.
All right. So what was your? But you were aware of the draft, though.
Oh yes.
Okay. And were you expecting that sooner or later they would catch up with you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, once you do get drafted, then take us through the process. You get the draft notice, then what do?
I had to go downtown. They put us on a bus, took us to Cleveland regional office, all-day physical. That was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
If we passed or failed, then we got on the bus and came home and waited for our next notice to come, the report.
When people went in for the physical, were there people who were trying to find ways to beat the system, or?
Yes,
Okay.
there was many. Some protested religiously, some wore sheets, some poured actual packets of water in the urine test. If they acted up, they just called the MPs, they hauled you across the hall and told them they were Marines, and everybody was calmed right down.
Okay, so people tried stuff, but it didn't work?
No, soap under the armpits, get the blood pressure up. There was all kind of things.
All right. But you didn't pull any of that stuff yourself?
No, no need to.
Okay. So basically, where you're willing to go, you figure your country calls and
Yes.
okay, I go? Yeah. All right. So how long did you have to wait around before you got your instructions on reporting for basic?
Not long.
And where do they send you for basic training?
They sent me to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. That was August, September, and then from there went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, till January.
Okay. Describe what basic training consisted of at Fort Campbell.
They told us from day one we were all going to a country called Vietnam, and they taught us everything to be able to survive, from the basics to the most extreme.
So they're actually teaching you about conditions in Vietnam, or trying to?
They were, like I told the doctors before, they were programming us. During basic training, they broke us down physically and mentally, so we would react to different commands from our drill sergeants, and once they got to that point, we were functioning just like a group of not boys anymore, but people following orders and not thinking about what the orders are, just reacting.
Okay. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to make the adjustment to that way of doing
Very
things?
hard. You come out of high school, you're all smiles and happy and go lucky, and then they're trying to get you into an environment that is hostile. If you look the wrong way, you're dead. If you act the wrong way, you're dead. And they really prepare us mentally.
Okay. Now, were there, did you push back with the training, or did you just try to work with it as best you could?
I did the best I could in whatever they were trying to teach us.
Okay. Did you have people who were still trying to resist or argue or fight back?
Yes.
Okay. And how does that play out, or what kind of things would they do, and how do the...
They would recycle them. They would start them off in another training brigade as day one.
Mhm.
And those who couldn't cope the second time around, most of them got out on like a hardship discharge, unsuitable for military.
What proportion of the guys you started out training with kind of finished the basic training on schedule?
Majority of them.
Okay. And physically, what kind of condition were you in when you went in?
19 years old, basic physical health, but after basic training, your mind was equipped to take on 5 Marines and beat them.
All right. Now, you build up your physical strength or your endurance in basic training? I mean, did the physical training do that, or were you in pretty much the shape you needed to be already?
No, the guys that were a little bit overweight, they went to more PT training, and the rest of us, every day was the same routine to build up our endurance.
All right. Now, the guys who were teaching you, were these guys who had been to Vietnam, or were they just drill instructors?
We had one drill instructor that was a Nam, got wounded, came back to be an instructor. The rest of them were going through training just like the rest of us,
Mm-hmm.
in preparation of going over,
Okay.
but they were all sergeants.
Right. So they've been through the NCO training at this
Yes.
point, but not rotated over yet. Okay. Now, then you go to Fort Polk for AIT. That's your
Yes.
next stop. Physically, what was Fort Polk like, or what was that area like?
As the bus pulled in, there's big signs called Tiger Land. It was more God's country, open, more physical training, more weapons training, escape and evasion training. They started feeding us a hard-boiled egg and a piece of toast for breakfast to shrink our stomachs for preparation of what was coming.
Did they have kind of forest or swampy areas around for you to train in?
Yes, it was all wets. A lot of times they take us out and give us degrees, and you had to find your way back, and it was all nasty and dirty.
All right. Now, were there problems there? Did you have alligators or snakes or other things like that?
I didn't see any, no.
Okay, so that at least wasn't an issue. All right. Now, the men who were training you at this level, had more of them been to Vietnam at this point?
Same way, some were, some weren't.
Okay. Did they try to give you any kind of training in terms of how to, say, deal with civilian populations or populated areas, or was this just all out in the swamps?
It was military versus military.
Okay. All right. And then how long does this last?
That was another 8 weeks, 10 weeks.
Okay. Now, did you have, what kind of MOS did you come out with?
11 Charlie, which is the borders.
Mm-hmm.
But they also trained us on the M16, the M14, the M60, laws. They gave it all to us. But my specialty was for the mortars. But when we got to Nam, it threw me in the infantry rifle.
All right. This is what they needed when you got there.
Yes.
All right. Now, when you complete AIT, do they let you go home before sending you overseas, or do you get a post in the States first? Or
They asked us if those who wanted to go to jump school can go to jump school. The other ones can go home for 5 days before reporting to California to be shipped out.
okay. Now, which option did you take?
I went home for 5 days.
All right. What was it like to go home and know that you're going off to Vietnam next?
The family was sad, but I knew I was prepared to do what I had to do.
All right. And then physically, how do they get you out to Vietnam? What's the process?
From California, they put us on a United commercial jet with stewardesses and meals, and flew us to Hawaii. Then we went to Guam, another island, then on to Vietnam.
All right. What was the atmosphere like on that plane as you were flying? Was this a chartered one for
Yes.
military?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So what was it like on that plane?
I passed out, didn't wake up till we hit Hawaii. My buddy next to me ate my steak. They said they couldn't wake me up. But it was emotionally drained because you're on a plane for 23 hours, going over in your mind. You don't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And as 19 years old, I've been trained to kill people. Am I going to be able to shoot somebody?
Right. What was your first impression of Vietnam when you got off the plane?
Hot. It was like hitting a brick wall as you stepped off the plane because you were so conditioned to the air conditioning on the plane. When we landed in January, it was like walking into the Twilight Zone.
All right. Where did you land in Vietnam?
Benoit.
Okay. And then you get off the plane, what do they do with you?
They just put us in formation, they call your names, assign you to a company. I remember doing KP, and then they shipped us off to what they called search training for a week. Our instructors just wore black hats. We lived in hooches. It was fenced in, and during the day they would take us outside the wire on patrols, trying to prep us so when they put us in the real jungle.
Okay. And what kinds of things do they want you to learn, or what sort of preparation are you getting?
Follow orders.
Okay.
If they say stop, you freeze. Don't question.
And did they try to teach you how to spot booby traps or things like that, or?
Most of that was done in training, but there was more that they showed us there that it was on-the-job training, more or less.
Okay. And are they still focusing on just dealing with enemy military forces as opposed to, people in civilian areas or things like that?
They told us that where they were going to send us, it was strictly regular NVA Army.
Okay. Now, did you know at this point what unit you were going to join, or where?
No.
Okay.
No.
But they had some idea.
They had it all mapped out. When we finished our search, I remember they threw me and somebody else on a helicopter and took us out in a jungle, and that's when I met my lieutenant and Greek, my
Okay.
sergeant.
So what unit did they assign you to?
That was in the 2nd platoon,
Oh,
Delta, 1st to the 506,
okay, in the 101st Airborne.
101st Airborne, Air Mobile, Air Assault.
All right. And where were they based at the time you joined them?
We were at Camp Evans, which was up north in I country,
Mm-hmm.
or one country.
And-
First month we just patrolled the lowlands, and then it was probably 2 months later we hit the A Shau Valley.
Okay. Let's talk about that first part first. Now, they take you out. Now, was it the helicopter that did you fly to Camp Evans, or did they take you to a smaller place where your company was, or how did it?
From Benoit, from the airport, they put us on a Chinook, There was a bunch of us and flew us up north, got off at Camp Evans, and then from there they assigned you where they had to.
And was your company at Camp Evans when you got there?
They were in the field.
Okay. And did you wait for them to come into the field?
No, they took me out
And how did they get you out?
by helicopter.
Okay. They kind of fly you out. So you go in, you join your company, and what sort of reception do you get when you get there?
New cherries here. New blood.
All right. And once you joined them, did anybody make any effort to kind of explain to you what was going on or give you any advice on what to do?
The ones I met at that time, they try to help you out. They tell you where to go. And then your squad leader kind of points you in more directions.
Okay. And do you remember going out on patrol with them for the first time?
Yes.
Okay. Kind of what was that like, or what do you remember about it?
They kept saying, this is the real thing.
Now, what was the country like that you were patrolling in? Was it open country or grassland, or?
It was open grassland with little hills on it.
Okay. And when you were moving, were you going just as a squad or platoon or whole company, or?
As a second platoon.
Okay. And about how many men were in the platoon when you joined it?
I don't remember that, but there was between 18 and 20 of us when we got shot up the last time.
Okay. So a squad, do you have a sense of how big your squad was when you joined that?
I would say might have had 4 squads, maybe 5 or 6 in a squad.
Okay. All right. And when you would go out, initially when you're out patrol, where would they put you in the squad? Did they try to make you go walk point right away, or in the rear, or in the middle someplace?
Just, they had their appointment already trained, and they just put you in line somewhere.
And when you'd move through that open country, how far apart would you be normally?
We were 5 or 6 feet.
Okay. Now, were there trails in those places, or would you just go walk over the grass, or?
From our sergeant, we stayed off the trails. Trails always ended up in an ambush, so we made our own trails.
Okay. Now, on that first patrol, did you have any kind of contact, or was it quiet?
No contact. We saw him, but we had no contact. We didn't have contact till we hit the A Shau.
Okay. Now, when you were at Camp Evans, based at Camp Evans, did you spend time camped out overnight outside of the perimeter at times, or were you mostly just inside of it at night?
No, the full time I was there, I might have slept in a cot 3 times.
Okay.
It was strictly all jungle.
Okay.
We go out 35, 45 days, come back in.
Okay. But that's sort of so how long were you at Evans before you started doing that, I guess? Was it?
The time I got to Evans, went through, I would guess, maybe a week of KP duty, then on the certs, and then for a week, and then right out to the jungle.
Okay. Now, so did you get up there? You talked about certs, or was that the training you already talked about, or was this another level of training?
This was training in country, which was the procedures they wanted us to follow in country.
Okay. But was this specific to the 101st?
Yes.
Okay. All right. But then once that's done, then pretty quickly though, they're sending you now into jungle areas, and as opposed to, because you're talking about going through grassland and hills initially.
Yes.
I guess how long were you doing that?
I would guess maybe a month and a half.
Okay. And while you were doing that, were you sleeping out in the field?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So at night, what would you do?
We would set up in a perimeter, and if there was 2 guys in a spot, one would sleep, one would stay awake, and then they shift back and forth all night.
Now, when you set up a perimeter, what kind of defenses would you have?
We would set up the claymores, the trip flares in front of us, in case something did happen to sneak in.
But they're not bringing in concertina wire or things
No.
like that for that?
No.
Okay.
That was only on the fire support basis.
Right. Okay. And would you dig in at all, or just?
Sometimes we would. Sometimes we would just, if the vegetation was high enough, just.
Now, did enemy try to probe those perimeters at all, or did they ever shoot mortars at you or things like that?
Yes, many times. Like I said, once we got to the valley,
Mm-hmm.
satchel charges, mortars.
But were they doing it in the area around Evans, or was that
No.
quiet?
No, that was pretty much quiet.
All right. And then when they tell you you're heading off into the jungle now and you're going to head off toward the A Shau, did the veteran guys in the unit say, okay, this is going to be different or harder, or did you just go?
We just went
Okay. And then how did they get you out there?
by helicopter again.
Okay. And were you going to an established fire base or a new LZ, or what was it?
It could be just a open spot in the jungle. It could be a regular fire support base that we're leaving another company. They told us very little. They just threw us on, dropped us off.
All right. Do you remember sort of going out into the jungle for the first time, or the first of those trips out? Or have they all run together now?
They all run together.
All right.
Once you go on the first one, they're all the same. Some are hotter, some are quiet.
All right. Describe a little bit the country that you're operating in now. They're sending you sort of it's jungle terrain. So physically, what does it look like to you as you're going through it?
The lowlands were creeks and wetlands and grass, and your feet were always wet. At night, you always change your socks. Put the other ones around your neck till they dry the next day. Leeches. Then when we got to the mountains in the valley, the rains were cold at night. You could see your breath. The rain lasted a long time. You were just miserable.
Okay. Now, did you have any way to keep yourself dry? Did you have ponchos or?
We weren't allowed. Our policy was we didn't take ponchos. It made too much noise.
Hmm?
The dinks would hear the noise and come. All we had was our tropical blankets.
All right. Now, how long would you be out on patrol at a time? How long would you be away from base?
First time was 30-some days. We came in for a day, got resupplied, showered, shaved, went back out the next day. That was 45 days.
Mm-hmm.
Came back in, and then the last time was out the Marine.
All right. Now, was there a sort of daily routine when you're on one of these long patrols out in the jungle? What happens day to day?
You try to be quiet. You could hear somebody talking a long way away. There was no noise, no animals, just quiet. I had the handset on the radio as low as it'll go, wrapped in a towel, tied, try to keep the noise down.
So were you working as an RTO then?
Yes.
Okay.
When my lieutenant's radio man went to the captain to be his radio man, they asked me to walk point and carry the radio. I says, no brainer, give me the radio. There again, they gave us radio class training also.
Okay. All right. And how heavy was the radio?
Too heavy. We had trouble with the batteries. They made me carry 2 extra batteries because they would just go dead all of a sudden.
Now, were these radios that had big long antennas on them, or did you have a short antenna?
At the beginning, I had a real long, flimsy, and then I got a better antenna they sent me that was shorter.
Because at certain points, I mean, our RTOs were targets for snipers or
Yes.
anybody, and those big long antennas were a giveaway.
Yes, I carried mine wrapped down and it was tied on the bottom to
Okay.
try to conceal it.
All right. So you were the RTO for your platoon leader then?
Yes.
Okay. And how early on did you get that assignment?
Well, probably after a month,
Okay.
I'm guessing.
All right. So basically, most of the time you're walking around in the jungle, you're carrying a radio.
Yes.
Okay.
In communication with the other squads and the captain.
Mm-hmm. All right. And when you move through a jungle area, how would you go about doing that? Were you still staying off the trails, or did you have to use them sometimes?
Yeah, we stayed off the trails. Trails are nothing but trouble.
Now, were there other units that were using them and getting into trouble? Or?
Ambushes, yes.
Okay. But if you're going through jungle, aren't you having to hack your way through with machetes or something? Or?
Sometimes. Sometimes you're just working your way through. If we did a click a day, we were happy.
Okay. So in order to keep fairly quiet, you can't just be chopping away on our scale like that. All right. And as you were, would you move by day or by night?
By day.
Okay.
As it was getting dark, we always set up for nighttime.
Okay. And when you set up for nighttime, were you setting up as a company or as a platoon? Or?
As a platoon.
Okay.
Even though the company was assigned to a certain region, each platoon had its own place to set up for the night.
All right.
And we got those from the captain.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so as you prepare to set up for the night, what are the steps that you take, or what happens there as you kind of get ready for the overnight?
If the ground is a pure rock, we dug in the best we could, set our flares, claymores, in preparation for the long night to come.
Mm-hmm. And how often did you have contact then, whether by day or by night?
Once we got in the valley and the mountains with the regular army, it seemed like every day.
Right. Now, would you see much of them during the day, or sometimes find them, or was it mostly at night when they came after you?
Sometimes you would see them crossing if you were high enough in the mountains, and most of the time they came after us at night.
All right. And did they have a standard procedure for doing that?
They hit us with satchel charges first, and then they'd come in.
About how big was one of these satchel charges? Did you ever see one that hadn't blown up?
Yes, I was throwing it back at them at one point.
How close would they have to be to throw them?
The ones we found that didn't go off were so big, so square, 2 inches square, 6 inches big. It was yellow dynamite with a blasting cap that they pulled. It starts to fuse. Wrapped in plastic. Some of them were more sophisticated, but it would take your arm off, your leg off in a heartbeat.
Okay, so they throw those first. Now, were they pretty much just sort of throwing those blind in your general direction, or
No,
could they target individual foxholes? Or
they kind of knew where everybody was setting up for the night most of the time. Sometimes they would just throw them and get lucky, and most of them that came in always took somebody out.
all right. And after they throw the satchel charges, what happens next?
By this time, we're all returning fire, except for the last battle. They just kept coming.
Okay. Now, so in the ones before the last battle, then, so are they just kind of just testing you to see what happens?
Yes.
Okay. And then you fire, and if you're firing, then can they see your gun flashes or things like that? Do they know where you are?
Yeah, we used red tracers going out.
All right. And it would seem to me, if you're saying they're usually getting somebody in each of these attacks, so were you constantly losing men?
Yes.
Okay. And would you just get new replacements sent out to you in the field, or did you just get smaller and smaller?
They got smaller and smaller, and when they got replacements in the rear, they came out on the chopper during the day.
Okay. And how long did it take? I guess by the time you went out into the jungle, did you already feel like you were sort of part of the unit and knew what you were doing, or did you still feel like the new guy at that point?
After about 30 days, you weren't the new guy anymore.
Okay. So by the time you're in the jungle, you're kind of at least part of the squad or the platoon at this point, and
Yes.
you know who those guys are. So then when they do bring in the replacements to your unit, did you have anything to do with them or try to help them?
No, once I became lieutenant's radio man, it was, I always stuck with the lieutenant and the sergeant.
Okay.
We were always in communication.
All right. And did you work well with the lieutenant?
Yes, up to a point.
And
When the captain got ambushed one night and the radio man lost his leg, then he died of a heart attack a couple days later at the hospital. My Lieutenant Fletcher, he turned on me. It got real cold, and we had a confrontation one night, and that's when he broke down, and he said he got real close with his first radio man, and it tore him up when he died, and he didn't get close to me, but I understood why. I said, you be what you have to be.
Yeah. So it wears on the officers as much as anybody else.
Yes, the stress. I didn't care if he was lieutenant or not. If you got a problem, talk to me.
All right. Now, so you've got a period there sort of several months. You're spending a lot of time out in the jungle, these sort of long patrols, go in, take some losses, get some probing attacks and so forth. Now, did you at that time conduct any operations that seemed to be successful or doing what they were supposed to be doing? Were you able to ambush them or make trouble for them? Or
At certain times we'd go out and set up ambush sites, and nothing ever happened. It was always daytime skirmishes or at nighttime for sure.
Okay. And with a daytime skirmish, sort of how would that play out?
They would hit and run. If we sent out a little patrol out, they would hit them and they would hide.
So how much did you ever actually see of them, at least before the final fight?
During the day, very little, except for when they would sneak, and they had tunnels everywhere.
Okay. And did you ever uncover tunnels or bunkers or find any of those?
Yes, we found we came around the bottom of a mountain on a little higher ground. There was a bunker complex, highly sophisticated for a company or larger size. They had the latrine with the bamboo all lashed. But they weren't there. A lot of bunkers. They were set up in a good ambush site to protect their people inside.
Except they weren't there when you got there?
No.
Okay.
No, they had moved on.
When you find a bunker complex like that, what happens? Do you call in somebody to blow it up, or?
We go through all the hooches and what we have, and we didn't blow nothing up on this one. We just moved in, investigated, moved out.
Now, as the lieutenant's radio operator, do you have now kind of any better idea of what's going on or what you're supposed to be doing, or is it still mostly mysterious?
As far as our missions, it was people in the rear knew what we were doing. They would send us out there and patrol the area, and we just relay what we find and so forth back.
Okay. Now, when you did make contact of one kind or another or come under attack at night, were you able to call in air support or artillery support?
Yes. One time we called in fighters from the Air Force. They dropped napalm. Helicopters came out. Flare ships came out. We called in artillery, mortar support. Most of it was all there. And I had all the frequencies on what to go to ask for support.
Now, when the Vietnamese would attack you, what kind of firepower did they have besides the satchel charges?
They would have their AK-47s. The last battle, they hit us with machine guns, tear gas. They hit us with all when we came in and landed.
Okay. Now, before you're in the last battle, you're making these long patrols and so forth. How are you getting supplied?
As we ran low, I would call in a resupply. I never said numbers on the radio. We had a nasty shackle, and the nasty shackle was just a dirty word from 0 to 9. And I would say nasty shackle, like Alpha Bravo,
Mm-hmm.
which gave them a number on what we had left. And then they would set up a resupply helicopter to come out.
So they have to find. Would you sometimes make a hole in the canopy for them to come through, or did you have open places they could land?
Sometimes they would fly by and drop us out cases of C4 and det cord. And then we would set up a site big enough, and then we'd blow up one charge. Then a helicopter would come in before the dust settled, either get us out or give us what we needed, and we moved on quick.
Okay, but the idea was do it quickly because there were bad guys in the area. and
Yes, the
start shooting them.
noise, they would hear the noise, they would come.
Now, did you have situations on these patrols where the helicopters were coming under fire anyway?
Yes. At one point, as the helicopters were coming out, they were getting shot down.
And so did you have some of those missions aborted and so forth because of that?
We were already in the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
We had low water, low ammo. Finally, a helicopter made it through.
And then are you also getting medevacs coming in and taking out your wounded as they get hit?
Only if the weather was good. A night attack, it wouldn't come in. We had a guy, he had a big white dot on his helicopter, and he was a ghost rider. And he came in, we were in the mountains, we were socked in, and the guy was dying, he had to go. This guy come out, and we talked him in by the sound of the mountain, the echo, and he came straight down, and when he did, you couldn't see in front of you from the fog and the mist and everything. So he shut her down. He says, I'm only shutting her down for 10 minutes. If it doesn't clear, I'm out of here. So we loaded him up, and he waited, and 10 minutes later he fired up, and he said, I'm going straight up. If the echo doesn't sound right, let me know. And the guy did survive in the hospital.
Yeah. So you had some good pilots.
We had some good pilots. We had some pilots that were afraid, but the majority of the pilots were. That's why we're here.
All right. Now, were there occasions where they could bring you sort of any extra supplies or better food or things like that, or drop in a case of beer, or does that not happen when you're out there?
I remember times when they would resupply us. There'd be an ammo canister with a plastic bag, and it either had like hot rice or maybe spaghetti,
Mm-hmm.
but that wasn't too often.
Okay, so occasional hot food, but that's pretty much it.
Yes.
And then what do you do for water when you're out there? Do you drink out of streams, or do you just...
I carried a 1.5-gallon canteen. In the mountains, the streams were pure, clean with the minnows. We would dump out the water that they would send us. It was nasty, and we drink from the streams.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then what are you doing for food at that point?
We had our sea rations. Occasionally we get a dehydrated meal. Most of it was seas.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you have, and then when you got back to a base camp after being out for a month or whatever, then what's the process there?
We leave our rook at the pad, take our M16, walk down to the barber shop, get a shave and a haircut.
Now, did they use Vietnamese barbers, or did they?
Yes, there was Vietnamese barbers on base.
And did you wonder about them at all?
I said, they're going to kill me with a straight razor. They're going to do it here, or they're going to do it in the jungle.
Right. And would there be a lot of Vietnamese working on the bases during a day, or just a few?
I don't know.
Okay. You're not there long enough to know.
Not there long enough to find out what's going on.
Okay. Would they issue you new fatigues when you go in? Or?
We had a bunch of fatigues in our duffel bags, and then we would just go and throw the ones we had on away and grab a new set.
Take a new set. All right.
At one point, they actually sent us out clean fatigues, but you know, different names, you know, but they were clean.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you have a certain kind of regular routine or pattern that you follow several times, but then the last patrol you go out on, that's the one that gets really ugly?
Very ugly.
Okay, you basically try to sort of take us through that patrol as best you can. You're going out, and what happens?
The last battle,
Yeah. Or how long are you out there in the field before that battle actually happens this time?
we took off from a fire support base. It was a company assault. There was 21 helicopters and at least 6 guys in each helicopter. And a helicopter would come in, land, we'd load up and take off. They just kept flying a big circle until we were loaded, and then we took off for an abandoned fire support base. The gunships were on their first helicopter, and on the way in, they fired their rockets just to prep the area.
Mm-hmm.
And then first helicopter landed. The helicopter I was on was the last to land. They started shooting at us. Somebody popped red smoke. The other ones detoured away. Our medic was on the other side of the helicopter, and he took a chest wound as he was getting off. They hit us with machine gun, tear gas. It was a very, very hot LZ. The sergeants in charge and the squad leaders, we set up a fast perimeter. We took care of business. They kind of folded back. The other helicopters came in. We made a big perimeter on top of the old mountain. That night it was quiet. That was on May 5th. May 6th, they did some patrolling on the bottom. One patrol, Greg was in. As they were going up a hill, Dink jumped up. They had no place to go. And Roger, who was on point, he just fell back. And as he rolled back, he took a AK in the rump. It wasn't death wound, but it hurt like hell. That night, on May 6th, it was quiet until about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And then they hit us. Our second platoon was the only one on the mountain at this time. The other ones had all moved off. The mountaintop was too big for us to secure. We were spaced out far.
But were you spaced out kind of all around the clearing, or just on one end of it?
We were in a circle somewhat, but we were spaced out far, not closer than we normally do. The position to the left of me popped a grenade. Minutes before that, I just asked for a sit rep, and everybody gave me their sit rep. And Lieutenant heard the grenade pop. He sat up, and then it was 4th of July. he took there was a dink right in front of him. When he sat up, he gave away his position. He took a full mag, either AK or M16. The position to the right of me was, they were dead. The position to the right of them was already dead. They had crawled in and slit their throats. Satchel charges coming in everywhere, going off. They counted 20-some charges that didn't go off around me. At one point, I was looking down at the top of the mountain, watching the battle. Didn't understand what was happening. Kept saying, I gotta get back and help him. I gotta get back and help him.
So where are you relative to the rest of the men in the platoon at this point? Because you had your circle, and part of it got broken into.
They came up our side.
Mm-hmm.
It was me, Sarge, Lieutenant. We were on this part of the mountain here. We had people to the right, people to the left, and then all the way around the circle. Basically sheer rock coming up this way. And there was sheer rock here, but that's the side he decided to come up. Moments after the battle started, Sarge's weapon jammed. He grabbed the radio off of me, went to the center of the circle. When I came to, I still had my hand on my weapon. I took care of business. They were closer to me than you are right now. Whether they were getting ready to pick my body, I don't know, but I took care of business.
So were you knocked out by concussion from a blast, or?
Probably from a satchel charge at that point, many of them.
Okay, but did you remember the sergeant taking your radio? Or?
No.
Okay, so basically.
When I came to, Sarge said in the hospital that I was out for a long time.
Okay.
When I came to, my eardrums were gone. I heard nothing. I saw these dinks looking at me every time a charge would go off, and I did what I had to do. At this point, I realized Sarge wasn't next to me. Lieutenant was lifeless. And every time a flash would go off, I'd see a new face. I had basic load, M16 of 21 magazines. I carried an extra 7. Sarge kept yelling, "Go help little David, or we're all dead." At this point, I realized I was the only one left on basically a half a perimeter of circle.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, Greg, it was the thumper man, grenadier. He says, "Gotta do something." So he come running. As he was running towards Sarge, he was running into the dinks. The thumper has to make 7 revolutions to be armed on the warhead, and they were going right through the dinks. In the hospital, Top asked him, he says, "What you do?" He says, "I got dead dinks up there with holes in them." Well, they didn't explode until they went through them. On the way to Sarge, he got some. From Sarge to me, he got more.
So do they know where you were? We were firing, so they could guess that was you at that point, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We always made sure where our positions were before the lights went out.
So did you stay in your position then and just fire from there, or did you try to move and get to where the sergeant was?
I stayed there because if I would have left, nobody would have made it. And then finally, Greg made it to me. A dink jumped up real close, shot an RPG. It went between us. It exploded behind us. We both received shrapnel. As Greg was thumping his thumper, he got shot on the side. He went down. But we held that part of the perimeter.
Mhm.
Daylight came. 3rd platoon was at the bottom of the hill on another little knoll. As they made their way, when the battle started, they got ambushed. So it took them a while to take care of the ambush. They finally made our way to us at daylight, and as they came up the backside and over to us, some sergeant come running over to help me at the position, and Greg, and he got shot. I carried him back, and that's when one of the medics was there and says, "You're not going anywhere, soldier, stay here." And that's when the other people from the 3rd platoon, at one point the gun Greek called in the flare ship. Now he can't hear, his eardrums are bleeding, and he's screaming for help. At one point the first flare ship out landed right behind me. I didn't even know. I was either out or I was too busy doing what I had to do. The intense, and when Doc told me that I was wounded, that's when I said ouch. Up to that point I had no idea I was wounded. The adrenaline was pumping so much I had no pain.
Okay. Now, was this shrapnel from the RPG they shot at?
RPG,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. All right.
My back was peppered. My jungle shirt looked like a screen.
All right. And then at some point, do they medevac you out of there?
As everything got secured and more, they called in for the medevacs, and they loaded up the guys that were worst. And then the last helicopter out was myself, Greg, Sarge, we called Greek, and our forward observer, who called in we finally got a forward observer that he had direct contact with the artillery in the rear for our position for fire.
So were you able to get, how close in did they call in the artillery in that situation? Practically on top of you? Or?
We popped our flares in front of us as the gunships were coming in, so they wouldn't go beyond a certain point. When the flares ran out, we lit our C4 and popped it in front of us, so they had some kind of idea how far to come in. But yeah, we were getting secondary.
Now, were you doing that even while you were in your original position that night?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would jump from my hole to Sarge's hole. It was all rock, so the holes weren't that deep. But as the charges would come in, I would jump. They would go off.
So you go back and forth between those and not just stay in one place and wait for it?
No.
All right. While you're doing all that, how long a period of time do you think this took, this firefight that you're in? Was it 5 hours or an hour?
From the time it started, on the intel reports, I think it lasted like 3 hours.
Okay.
During the time, we had no recollection. It wasn't until the fact that I applied for the intelligence reports that we actually knew what happened and why it happened, and that the generals in the rear knew there was a battalion of NDA in our area with a company of sappers. They didn't tell us that.
And they targeted specifically your platoon. I guess they'd ambushed another one. Was there a 3rd platoon in the company out there somewhere?
The 3rd platoon was at the bottom of the hill.
Right. And there was your platoon.
We were 2nd platoon.
Okay, where was 1st platoon?
1st platoon, I have no recollection. They were out there somewhere.
Right. So when you're in that kind of situation, are you just kind of reacting automatically, or just do you have some kind of survival sense, or do you not even know why you did what you did?
You just do what they trained you to do.
Okay. All right. So they've now you've survived this. They take you back. Do you go back to Evans, or where do you go?
They took us to an aid station. From an aid station, they flew us to. They flew me to 6070 back, and that's when I ended up with. I met Greg and Greek at the hospital, the rural hospital.
All right. And where was that?
In Nam, close to Camp Evans.
Okay. So it's still that area.
That same area, yes.
All right. How long were you in the hospital?
every day they would, after they stabilized me and did what they had to do, and every day they would work me closer to Cameron Bay, which is in the southern part. And got shot up on May 7th. And I was home back in the States for Memorial Day. And then I spent another 4 months in a hospital.
Okay, and what hospital were you in then in the States?
I ended up at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, at the Veterans Hospital.
All right. Now, after all of that, do you get discharged, or do you still have time left?
I had a year left.
Okay.
They trained me for 4 months. I was in Army, almost 5 months. Then I was in a hospital. I had a little less than a year to go. Well, 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
When I was discharged from the hospital, they told me I was a clerk, and they sent me to Fort Dix, New Jersey.
And was that where you spent the rest of your time?
Yeah, that's where I spent the rest of my year.
Okay. And so what did you do there? What was life like then, that last year?
It was hard readjusting because from the hospital right back to civilian life, military life, stateside, it was people around me, they didn't want to talk about it, listen about it. You know, you kept everything inside. You still had your quirks from noises, didn't trust people, so forth, so on.
What actual work were you doing there?
I was in charge of the National Guard crybabies who wanted to go home before their training was over.
So are you just processing their paperwork?
Just paperwork and records, make sure the records were up to snuff.
And was this just like a 9-to-5 sort of job?
Basically, yes.
Okay. And did you live on the base?
Lived on base, still had duties at the company, KP. They assigned me to a burial detail. They started one up because the boys coming back. People were requesting military funerals. I did 5 of those, and I told the old man, I said, I can't do no more.
What proportion of the men around you that you were working with had been to Vietnam already?
I would say half.
And did any of you guys talk to each other, or did you just all kind of stay in your own
We all
places?
stayed in our own perimeters.
Right. And were there things you could do to blow off steam or relieve tension or whatever? I mean, did you go into New York or do anything like that?
No. I kind of stayed low and did my time and went home.
Okay. And were you communicating with your family during this time?
Yes.
Okay. And what were you telling them? Or what were you saying to them?
Everything was fine. Don't worry. The letter, when I got to the hospital, they made us write a letter. And when Mom got it, it was in a nice, clean envelope. She wouldn't open it. She knew something happened. Because all our other mail, guys would give it to me, I'd put it in a paper sack, but it was dirty fingerprints on most of the letters. And they got dirty.
Mm-hmm.
When a helicopter came out, I made sure the mail bag got on the helicopter to go back.
When you were out there in the field in Vietnam, how often would you write?
Once a month.
Okay. And were you getting stuff from home?
Occasionally you get a care package and they would send it out. And then you would share it with people with you.
Were you able to tell people at home what was good to send? Did you send any requests back?
Yes, I sent a request back for my dad to send me a sheath knife. They didn't give us any knives. The salted pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, anything with salt, because we the salt pills just weren't getting it. Packed stuff in popcorn. If there was no bugs in the popcorn when it got to us, we ate the popcorn and cookies.
Okay. Did you cook popcorn out in the field?
No, it was already popped.
Oh,
They
okay.
use it for packing
Oh, all right.
to fill in the spaces.
All right. So basically, your family doesn't really, at this point, have much of any idea what it was that you were really doing while you were out there. All right. And you just kind of go through those last 11 months at Fort Dix and just kind of do the job and keep
Just
it
buy
yourself.
my time.
All right. So you get to the end. Did anybody make any effort to get you to re-enlist or anything like that?
No. They had my ceremony 30 days before I got out. And the recruiting officer says, I know you're not going to re-up. I said, you're right.
Okay. He said you had your ceremony. What are you referring to?
Sarge put me in for the Medal of Honor for that night. I ended up with the Distinguished Service Cross. They included my award ceremony on base with the retirement ceremony. They had the band and refreshments. My parents came up, and the general represented me. Said that was the highest award he's ever given to anybody in his career.
Now, how did you feel about that at that time? Did it mean something to you that they?
I didn't even know what it was.
Okay.
The rank of the medal.
But they were making all of this show over you.
Yes.
On some level, did you appreciate that, or would you rather have been left alone then?
At that point, I had very mixed emotions. I said, why are they honoring me for the ones that got killed?
All right. This tape is just about done here. We're almost done. I'm going to stop here, rewind. All right. Now we've gotten you in your story here, basically to the point where you've come to the end of your time. You've been given the DSC and so forth, and the Army has figured out they're not going to get you to come back. So you get discharged then in '71. What do you do then once you're out?
For a while I did nothing, and then I went back with the Highway Department.
And did you stay with them?
No.
Okay.
I moved on to different jobs. Worked a while, moved on to another job.
Now, were you having just kind of a hard time adjusting to civilian life after all the stuff you went through?
Yes, it was hard.
And what kind of, I don't know, was there any kind of support being offered by the VA at this point or anybody else?
I knew of no support at all. I was on my own. I kept it myself. What little friends I had, I kept them.
Did you have friends who were your friends before you went off and came back?
Yes.
Okay.
New friends, no.
And had any of your friends gone to Vietnam too, or was that just you?
Just me.
Okay. And was the moving on from job to job also just kind of part of it? You got restless or impatient with things, or?
I tried to better myself.
Okay.
I got in one place and then he laid me off, and I finally landed a job at a construction outfit and did paperwork. And I was with him for 9 years.
Okay. And did you kind of then stay with construction, or did you just kind of continue to move along?
No, at that point is when I lost it, and I went to counseling and I moved on with my life the best I could.
All right. And how did you wind up involved with the Ripcord Association?
In doing research, and having my brother Greg locate me, getting in touch with me, we found Sarge. Three of us started getting together and answering a lot of questions we had for 40 years, and finding out that this happened 2 months after we got shot up, and a lot of the people that survived us on Maureen went on the ripcord, and it was good getting associated with Ripcord. We all have different stories to tell, different emotions, and met the people that replaced us, met the people that went from Marine to Ripcord, and what they went through, and it's a good healing process.
And let's see, are you now retired or still working? Or?
I'm still working, planning on retiring in January.
And what kind of work are you doing now?
I'm a heating, cooling, refrigeration out of our local back home.
All right. Now, to look back on the whole thing, I mean, I guess if you had to go through it all again, would you have gone and done it, or at least accepted the draft and gone forward with it?
I'd do it tomorrow.
What do you see it? What's the positive aspect of the experience for you? I mean, are you in some ways either better or wiser for what you've been through, or?
I appreciate life. I appreciate friends. I don't take things for granted. A lot of people don't accept me for that.
But at this point, you know who you are?
I have a real good idea who I am, what I'm still capable of doing.
All right. Well, you've got a compelling story, and you tell it well. I just want to thank you for taking the time to share it with us.
Thank you, sir.
All right.